Hi everyone, this is a recording of the Windows to the Past researching Armagh's buildings and occupants. This was carried out on the 20th of April in the Armagh Robinson Library, and this is a recording just to make it more accessible to further people. So essentially this presentation will go through some of the resources that are available to you when you want to carry out so kind of more in-depth research and what sources to use and other kind of hints that are along the way. I suppose any kind of research, you should probably start locally first and work your way, further out. Well, actually, ideally, you'd probably start online and then, move on to local sources. So the talk was held in the Robinson Library in Armagh, and there's some really fantastic kind of worldwide collections that they have there. So it's not just an important local resource, but it's actually kind of has a whole kind of section of worldwide um, different features that they have and books, manuscripts that are kind of world renowned. So this includes the Rokeby collection of prints. So it's over 4,500 prints spanning from the 15th to 18th centuries. You also have the Beresford collection, which one of which talks about the detailing of the restoration of St Patrick's Church of Ireland Cathedral. Uh, Within this, you do have also library minute books, which captures local events. So there's one that captures the 1798 rebellion and how the library was closed, I believe, and also the church history as well. It captures kind of um, wider kind of stories and things that were going on at the time. Armagh County Museum, just on the mall, that's another fantastic resource that's just on our doorstep. Um, and it's one of those things where it's only by going and visiting it, you'll ever get an idea of what they hold, and it really is quite remarkable what they do hold there. Um, so one of the most important things if you're from Armagh is the Livingstone map of 1778. So this included it's a kind of a full drawing sketch of Armagh with an associated key to some of with the buildings. So it will then you will then be able to look at that map, which will have like a number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you'll be able to look at that key, which will give a description of that building. So that's a really important source, and it's possible then that you can go in later sources and go back to that map and find if your relatives, were actually residing at such a place. Now, I must say it's mostly focused on, I suppose, the gentry. So this is a wee snapshot here where we have kind of Market Street, English Street, and the some local names, tenements names, but you also have the Burgess family, which from Park and Ower. Um, so it's kind of very similar to this, like it's all detailed out and it sketches what's there and different wee bits and pieces. But the key is really the most important thing because it tells you so much more about the actual land and area. Uh, the local history book collection. So yeah, it's a fantastic range of local history books as well. Um, we also have the Armagh Grand Jury Session books, which date from the 1700s right up until the 1800s. So they go through a lot of the, I suppose, more mundane things. I suppose that was an early version of the council, you can almost say. So repairing roads, repairing bridges, but they would have included, the likes of contractors to fix the bridges, sort of included workmen, things like that there, and even local place names sort of mentioned, local place names and who lived there and who resided there. So there's also estate valuations for various kind of big estates, the Charlemont, even in Benburb, there's different bits and pieces there, and other maps that they do have in their collection. So and I also have a photographic archive, which I'll come to in a wee minute. So yeah, I would definitely state that starting off your research should either go into the Robinson Library, contact them before, ask them what you're interested in, what you're looking for. The same with Armagh County Museum, because I think when you look online, you don't get a true idea of what they have until you walk through those doors and you start asking people. That's when you get an idea of what they physically have. Uh, and also in Armagh, you do also have the Irish kind of collections through the libraries in I. So they're just out on the Market Hill Road. And again, that's another kind of specialist collection. And I would kind of advise you to contact them as well, because I didn't have enough time to write a slide on it. But yeah, there's again all sorts of local history books and pamphlets and things like that have been collected over the years. So it's again another very useful source. So Prony, the Public Records Office, Northern Ireland. So it's based out at the Titanic Quarter, and this is probably the most valuable, I suppose, source, kind of where you can get a lot of information. Um, it can be a wee bit daunting about where you start, but generally the e-catalog is kind of a good way to search. So if you go onto the website and go to search the e-catalog, essentially just works like Google. So you can just type in, Armagh, and you'll get, it's probably thousands of results, and you can refine that search furthermore by adding an English street or a relative's name and see what comes up. Sometimes you get lucky, sometimes you just don't. Um, so there are other ways you can get around that. So if the e-catalog, if you're not fully satisfied with that, you can go on to the valuation revision books, which are again all digitized on the Prony website. So you would type in the townland or street in which they lived. Now in Armagh, it will all come underneath Townland of Corporation, which can be a wee bit confusing. But within the actual revision books, there is an itemized index at the start with the, I suppose, street names and associated page number. So that's, you can kind of flick through that. The type allotment books, so kind of 1830s, 1820s, looking at the value of land and corresponding tithe, which is now fully digitized and accessible, and you can download it. There's also school records, which are digitized so they date from the mid 1800s, and actually quite a lot of useful information in that if you're, I suppose, particularly interested in the school building, not just in Armagh, but I suppose further afield as well. This is one of the documents that's up at Prony. This is so we can see here it's D1594/124. It's a bundle of 16 documents, leases, tenements, and land from His Grace the Lord Primate to J.H. Burgess. So it's a lease, a transfer of land, and they're quite interesting because it's kind of pre-made. It's kind of a generic template that they've got, and they just fill in between. So it's 1825, so 1825, between John Burgess of Park and Ower, the County of Tyrone, and Hugh Woods of the City of Armagh, brickmaker. And I thought this was very interesting because that's a bit of history there, a bit of social history. Of course, that a lot of buildings in Armagh, are stone, your sandstone, your limestone, but bricks became kind of a building material of choice in the start of the 1800s, and this is, I suppose, was before that was all industrialized. So it was kind of a very niche, small industry at that stage, but a very important one. And you kind of do wonder where Hugh Woods was doing his brick making and within the city. So again, you can go down a lot of kind of rabbit holes here and want to find out more about past industries and other people, not just your own relatives, and the impact that they have within the city. Here's another. This is I suppose a snapshot of the Livingstone map, 1778. So again, you can see the wee numbers. You have the kind of shaded boundaries. There's 4, 5, 6, and then there's the associated key that'll tell you who owned that and what was actually there. So that's in the county museum, and I kind of do recommend going there to see that. It's really fascinating. Um, you have all the different street names. You have Callan Street, Charter School Lane, Castle Street, Church Street. So kind of a good snapshot to see what was actually in Armagh at that stage. That's just another kind of zoomed in version of it. Here's another, I suppose, um, indenture or lease um, from John Henry Oakman of Armagh City, woolen draper, to John Blakely, Armagh merchant. Um, so again, we've got a kind of a very rough sketch of the property and land in question, but there's also talking here about the common sewer. So it's kind of more again mundane things that you'd never really think of, but they were actually very important. So this is 1790, and it's talking about kind of the sewage system in Armagh. So obviously, there had been issues in Armagh, and they obviously had. This is obviously a valued kind of part of Armagh City because it's mentioned here in this map, 2 foot wide common sewer, and he has the right to clean or open the sewer at all times. So again, this was a very important deed or lease to have because it meant that he could have some sort of ownership and use of that. So earlier I talked about the photographic archives in the Armagh County Museum. So the vast majority of these are still, I suppose, within the museum itself. But over the years, they have been very proactive in digitizing materials. So through Flickr, so Flickr is like a kind of image database of all sorts of things, but um, a lot of collections have been uploaded to this from the museum in recent years. So you have this one here, 1957. Um, you know, quite a unique image, capturing it was Armagh before there was a lot of change, in the 60s and 70s and so forth. So it captures really a kind of important moment in history. So there's quite a lot of images on their Flickr page. So you can just about see at the bottom here, Armagh County Museum. If you go to that website and search that, um, you will get this page, and there's hundreds and hundreds of images on it. Similar to Prony, so Prony they have their own Flickr page. There's an image here of Russell Street and the Picture Theatre, 1912. A lot of them would be I suppose, Allison collection. I think there's some from maybe the Lawrence collection, or the National Libraries of Ireland would have something similar. Uh, Britain from above, and Cambridge aerial imagery. So if you want to get another, I suppose, alternative view of Armagh, then this is the website. These are the two websites to go to. So Britain from above, I suppose that would date from about 1926 onwards. Cambridge aerial imagery, or St Joseph's collection, that would be 50s. I suppose that would date to. This is Armagh. So again, it's a bit hit and miss. Not everywhere is covered by these two kind of sites, but Armagh is covered. So if you go on to Britain from above, if you search that website and you log in, if you create a free account, that will let you zoom in. You can really, quite surprisingly, zoom in to fantastic detail onto these buildings. And I know I've seen from other examples, the workers leaving, mill factories and going into work, and even you can really see the detail there. So it's a really fantastic resource. The Cambridge aerial photography, that I suppose the sharpness of the images on the website. So again, search Cambridge aerial photography in Google, and you will get a map, and then you'll be able to zoom into your local area to see what they have. So we have a Navan Fort here from 1955. But if you try to zoom in on these, it's not, the images aren't as sharp. However, what you can do is Huroney, so the Historic Environment Record of Northern Ireland, they actually hold the kind of better quality images of this and allow you to zoom in. So that's one of these things. If you see an image of Armagh or further afield on the Cambridge Heritage Aerial Photography website. If you contact Haroni, they might be able to share you the more sharper image, which allows you to zoom in. So speaking of Haroni, um, that's another fantastic resource that we have here, but I suppose it's based in Belfast. Um, I suppose the most important collection, in my opinion, is the McCutcheon collection on industrial archaeology. So I suppose um, McCutcheon went out in the 60s photographing sites all across Northern Ireland and many industrial sites, capturing them before I suppose a lot of them disappeared. So this is Gillis's factory in Armagh, just suppose on the Loughgall Road. The factory, most of it's mostly gone. The chimney was removed a couple of years ago, so this has changed kind of remarkably from previous years. So it's kind of nice to have this snapshot in time. The the archive is, I suppose it's difficult to know what they have, but again, sending them an email to the Haroni at communitiesni.gov.uk, probably the best way to kind of figure out what they have. If you're interested in Armagh or a particular street or building, you know, email them and just see what they get, how they get back to you, because it's just sometimes you just never know, and if you don't ask, you don't get. And you can also visit their archives up in Belfast as well, and you can arrange a viewing. So really recommend this as another resource to check. The uh, kind of National Folklore Archive for Ireland, um, although I suppose not overly relevant, but they're just another. I suppose I'm just highlighting sources that can can you can get breadcrumbs from them, and you can get all sorts of things from it and build up a bigger picture. So we have images here, some images from the 50s and kind of one of the back lanes in Armagh. You also have the kind of local stories. So Arthur Kelly, owed a lawyer in Armagh a big sum. He was a fiddler, and this day he took his fiddle and played through the streets of Armagh up to the lawyer's door. The lawyer's wife knew him, and she called her husband. And when he saw Arthur's position, of course, knew it was hopeless to take any money from him. So they capture these kind of random wee stories, but kind of interesting stories. The fact that someone went to the bother of actually recording that is kind of quite interesting in itself. And here's one, not I suppose Armagh City related, but it talks about a thatcher in the year 1890 called Dennis Collins. Um, he thatched the roofs of the dwelling houses and office houses in the district about once a year. People thought it very unlucky to burn their hair when they got it cut, so they would put it underneath the thatch every time they got it cut. So again, touching on the folklore and bits and pieces of the local area, and it talks about who recorded that and their location. Another archive that's kind of might be worth having a look at if you wanted to know more about kind of Armagh itself, and some of the characters, is I suppose the kind of sound archives that are about. So there's not particularly many of them, but again, within the last few years, the National Museums Northern Ireland, Unlocking Our Sound kind of project, it resulted in a lot of um, records and tapes and stuff like that being, I suppose, not only digitized but actually indexed properly, so we physically know what's there. There is a searchable database in the British Library, on their kind of site, so you can kind of click if you type in Armagh and it will bring up. So this one here, for example, it's on the sound. You can just about see it's the www.sounds.bl.uk, and there will be a searchable database there that you can just type in Armagh. I've just picked out this one here. So this is a kind of a 3 hour long interview between Mary Dugan, Joe Dugan, and Tom O'Neill, conducted by Linda Ballard in Armagh. So it touches on a lot about folklore and ghost stories and local characters, things like that. So it's kind of an uh, interesting listen. If you're from Armagh and if you're going to hear about some more stories that you kind of maybe are or maybe not familiar with. The Historic Environment Map Viewer, that again is all available online. So if you type Historic Environment Map Viewer, into Google, Northern Ireland, you will uh, open up kind of this huge map of Northern Ireland with all the listed buildings, all the buildings at risk, all the defence heritage structures, industrial heritage. Um, it's a really useful source if you want to know more about a specific building in Armagh. So um, when you open up and zoom in, this will give you the listed building number. So we have HB 1520004. It's the Armagh Technical Institution, Market Street, and it's Grade B listed. Now, if you wanted to know further about that, if you were to click on that link to buildings database entry, it will open up a separate page which will break down, the architecture of the building, the history of the building, and why it was listed and when it was listed in the first place. So that's again another useful source to have, and kind of well worth, I suppose, using. Uh, Other dots, these kind of purplish, darkish dots, they're the heritage at risk. So if you're to, again, similarly click on that, it will tell you why that building's at risk and a wee bit of history behind it. So it covers kind of unlisted buildings as well as listed buildings. So kind of gives you a snapshot as to what the building is constructed of, and a bit of background information as well. So yeah, just kind of touched there on the heritage at risk. Um, there is kind of, I suppose, more images, I suppose, more than anything from the early 2000s, when a lot of the kind of surveys were taking place. So we have the Armagh jail here in 2003, and on the right hand side we have the 23 Dobbin Street, went back in 2007. So there's hundreds of other images available on the Flickr, which I've talked about before. So again, I'd recommend going onto Flickr and searching Ulster Architectural Heritage, and you'll find kind of a range of different photographs. Uh, Film archives, there's numerous of these here to explore now. Again, 5 or so years ago, you just wouldn't have had the kind of the rich variety of materials, but now it's a lot more easier to actually do this. So the biggest and most useful one, I suppose, now is the BBC Rewind. So again, a lot of kind of news stories, articles, and kind of more humorous things are collected here. Um, Again, for date from 60s, 70s, 80s, sometimes 90s as well. And just like any of these other websites, you can just type in Armagh, and you'll get hundreds and hundreds of different watchable resources there. The Digital Film Archive (NI), so it's similar. You just type in what you're looking for, and this is kind of a shot of Armagh Jail from 1966. Kind of it's very short, 50 second to kind of scan around the area. British Pathé, you also have videos on YouTube as well. So people now upload a lot of kind of tapes and stuff that they would have had to YouTube instead of these kind of more official things, and that's kind of another way in which you can just find out all sorts of interesting things. RTE actually have their own digital archive as well. So again, a lot of news broadcasts. So this was from 1990 in the Armagh Robinson Library again. So I think those are some of the more, I suppose, you're touching the edge of things on those sources I've just mentioned there. So if you wanted to physically get more information from a lot of sites, I would definitely recommend the Registry of Deeds archives. Now, it's an absolute um, massive task to go through these and actually find what you're looking for. But there is kind of a workaround to that. There's a really fantastic group of volunteers, the Irish Deeds Index, that are kind of digitizing it to make it, again, a bit more easier to access. So the deeds themselves, they date from about 1709 to 1930s, and they give you a description of the land, the neighbours, not just the big landlords, although most of the time it is, but also some of the smaller farmers and landowners as well. It's all freely accessible, via the family search website. So if you type in family search Registry of Deeds Ireland, you will eventually get to the website. You create a free account and you can then search it at the Registry of Deeds. But as I said, it's extremely difficult, and you have to get the book number, you have to get the actual volume number then, and within the volume number you have to go through and find the page number, and then eventually you'll get the more relevant information. So Dawson to Steele, this is a landowner to another landowner, so it can be very, very difficult. So I'm just pointing this one here, for example. This talks about a garden lately in the possession of Patrick McKeever, a tenement, large garden in Irish Street, 2 small slips of land and a garden plot adjoining. Goes on to talk about small stable in Irish Street, another tenement and garden belonging to Thomas Orr, and further down we have George McCann mentioned, who a garden near the Pound on the street between Irish Street and Callan Street. We have McCadden's name, we have Dawson's, we have Nicholas Cassidy. So all these names are listed here, and this is the 1700s, so it's a really good snapshot in time. And although again you do have to figure out exactly what building they're referring to, it can be very, very difficult. To talk about Scott Street and the gardens and the tenements. So it's very difficult to kind of narrow that down. This is another one. This is 1838 between William Penton, formerly of the city of Armagh. I think that's maybe nursery, may have been a gardener, and lately in America. So he was giving land to Mr. McKean, who was late of the Armagh and now of Darkley. And it mentions here about the garden commonly called the public garden adjoining the north side of the road leading from Armagh to Monaghan, containing 6 acres and 3 perches. So again, it's talking about this public garden, which I've never heard of before, and whether Mr. Penton had set this up, whether he was employed by one of the local landlords or the church to do this. We're not sure. So it's again, it can ask you a lot of questions again rather than answers. So maps are again by far one of the more interesting ways in which you can kind of see the changes in Armagh and understand more about it. The most famous, I suppose, map in Armagh not only is just the Livingstone map, but also the John Rocks map. So in 1760, he kind of did an overall map of County Armagh, but he also included on the top right kind of a sketch of Armagh City, and he also did one of Newry City as well. So it's quite an accurate map, and also quite an interesting map because it not only highlights houses and buildings and gardens and post offices and things like that, but it kind of highlights, I suppose, how the city was changing at this time. So you still have the Gallows Hill in 1760. You have closer on the Mall, you have the starting post, of your race course, the Horse Common. You have a Bridewell, your Barrack Street, I suppose, wherever it gets its name. So it can be a really useful tool to see what was on that land, I suppose, before a lot of changes happened. So looking at Barrack Street gets its name because of the barracks that was there. Roughly where I suppose near where the jail was. You have the Bridewell, again, which was later moved. So again, a lot of changes happened at this time, which are captured in this map. That map is again freely accessible online. If you just type in John Rocks map 1760 County Armagh, you will get a fairly good copy of it on a number of websites, and it's all freely accessible, and you can zoom in to great detail as exampled here. The historic environment map viewer, which I talked about before, also has the old maps on their website on the different layers on the layer list. So we have the first ordnance survey map records. That's shows you all the different buildings, your distillery, cholera hospital. Your third OS map, 1905. So again, further changes here. So again, fantastic resource to have in that map viewer. Just so I definitely recommend using the historic environment map viewer just for everything really, because there's so much information held on it. If you're interested, I suppose, in what the previous inhabitants were actually doing, in Armagh, there is a website in which you can look at previous archaeological excavations. So the website's called Excavations IE, and it's reports and notes from excavations all over Ireland, but does include Armagh as well. So this is one example here from 1991, and excavation took 10 weeks, examined garden, and they found coarse wares, green glaze wares, delft and porcelain. So it gives you an idea, I suppose, of what people were using back in those days, and kind of the history associated. So builds up a more rounder picture, I suppose, instead of names and dates and this, that, and the other. You actually see what people were using, and where did that material come from? Were there people trading that in Armagh? Obviously, there were. So it's kind of interesting coming at from that angle. The National Archives of UK. So look, if you look further afield, you do get more relevant sources now. Some of these have been digitized through their, I suppose, discovery search. So, and a number of these can be downloaded for free. I think you can download up to a max of 10 per day, and they come as PDF documents, which are emailed to you. Again, similar to, I suppose, a lot of them would be deeds, military records, and wills, but can break down on some barriers, that you probably would never have thought about searching the National Archives UK, because in London, you can imagine they would not have much of an interest in Armagh, but they do digitize all sorts of things everywhere, and it's even the National Trust collections are available online, so you can search that website and get all sorts of things from that. This is one of the examples here which I've talked about from the National Archives. So it's a will of Dr. John Johnson in 1760 Armagh. Talks about leaving his apparel, his silver watch, and furniture, all sorts of things to different individuals. The Virtual Treasury of Ireland. So this was released only last year. So it has a wide range of digitized documents on that website. So just again, you can just type in Armagh. You can be more specific if you want. But so some of these documents are kind of medieval, 1200s. Some of them would be more recent. Again, a lot of lance charters, wills, but also other more interesting things as well. I've picked out one here as an example. So this is from the Virtual Treasury of Ireland. It's 1925. It's the Boundary Commission. So talks about the undersigned merchants in Armagh authorise James Reid and James McVitie, both of Scott Street Armagh merchants, to appear at the Boundary Commission and give evidence on their behalf on their opposition to any transfer of land to Free State or extension of the present boundary towards Armagh City. And it mentions a lot of the merchants who were, I suppose, in favour of this. So you have a lot of names mentioned: Walter Ferris, General Merchant, Margaret Street. You also have, all these names, and some of them help. They put their address beside it as well. So if you wanted to figure out where they were trading at the time, is very useful. So we know that James McKee was at 38 Scott Street. He was a hotel proprietor. Gardeners, Scott Street Taylor, Sarah Black Hotel proprietor. So really interesting snapshot in time what people were thinking, and I suppose some of the fears at that time as well, because it was really, I suppose, the unknown. I would like to highlight one name though. So we have the Walter Ferris, who's described as a general merchant here in Market Street. So I've just used him as an example here. So you can look at other sources about, and you can. So this one here, for example, is the Prony Public Records Office Ulster Covenant search. So again, you can type in their name. So we have Walter Ferris, and he was residing at 2 Gosford Place in Armagh. You can see his signature and other people's signatures as well. So they give their address, which is helpful. I then went on to the British newspaper archives, and you type in that name Ferris, and you get other interesting things. We have David Ferris and Co. Albert House, English Street, Armagh. So I didn't really know anything. I've never heard of Albert House before. Didn't know anything about it. And whether Walter and David were connected, I'm not sure. But it talks about opening up a new premises here in 1892 on English Street. Um, but going back to Walter Ferris, he was kind of, I suppose, a bank manager at a time. One of his sons fought in the war in 1916 and was injured in it. And the Albert House, which I was talking about, this is a sketch from, I suppose it's actually from the Armagh Townscape Heritage website. It's a sketch of the premises, so it's a brick built building, but later became, it was Desi's clothes shop. And you could just about see here, right in the middle, just one of these things I pointed out. You can see the Albert House is still visible just on the front of it. So, which you can see here more clearly in the picture. So it's quite amazing that that's there, and it just shows you, what you go down, and the fantastic, I suppose, background that you can get from a lot of things. Um, the census records is again another useful source, but you have to be very wary sometimes about how you search. So I typed in Walter, Walter, found no record at all. There was this Walter Ferris didn't exist, but I then searched his wife because I knew that he was married to Rachel Ferris. So I typed in Rachel Ferris, and I found them on the actual census records. And then I looked at the Walter, and it's put in Waltor, and that made sure that I couldn't find it on the search engine. So you have to be very careful sometimes what you search for. If you're too specific and too knowledgeable, sometimes it can actually work against you, because it really just depends, I suppose, who took down this information. I'm looking at the building, 2 Gosford Place. So this is where he was residing at a time, and this is it from the BBC Rewind website snapshot here from 1981. So you can pick out a lot of things. You can see how that building has changed. In this, you can see there was more detail above the fanlight on the door entrance, and this is it, the building today, of course. So you've lost some of that detail on the fanlight because of, I suppose, all the different changes over the years. But this just shows you, if you type in one person's name, and it's quite addictive act where they were living and what they were doing as well. So now I'm going to look at 2 kind of case studies to see, uh, you know, how you can do kind of research and how you can put it to test. So this is one of the buildings in the Townscape Heritage Initiative. This is 43 Upper English Street. It's one of the 7 houses. It's number 1, 7 houses, and I suppose there's kind of a lot of, I suppose, there was a lot of debate and, I suppose, myth, I suppose, surrounding this building when it was built. Uh, so built in 1774, the row of 7 houses on Upper English Street was built by Holland Lecky, a nephew of Dean John Averell. The Armagh Kiana, volume 23, which is available online via the council actually, the county museum, talks about here the houses were erected by the Very Reverend John Averell, a local landowner who was prebendary of Tynan from 1765 to 1771, later Bishop of Limerick. The houses were erected for his 7 sisters. And now this is where this, I suppose, myth has kind of sneaked into, I suppose, being kind of a widely believed story. So it kind of turns out, just to make it a long story short, that highly unlikely that this was the case. Holland Lecky I suppose, built up these houses, I suppose, for himself and for renting out and so forth. Probably highly unlikely was anything to do with the Seven Sisters. That's kind of a misdemeanor, really. The buildings are actually, I suppose, noted in Livingstone's map, and actually John Rock's map, 1760, um, notes buildings at that location, but doesn't give an idea of what the size or scale or importance. Whereas Livingstone's map talks about the kind of good houses situated in that location. So again, here's the John Rock's map, 1760, and if we are just on that road to Castle Dillon, English Street, we're just talking about there. Holland Lecky, so who exactly was he? So he was from I suppose, a noble family in his own right, Castle Lecky, which is on the, well, building no longer exists, unfortunately. It's on Duncan Road near Downhill, County Londonderry. So um, kind of interesting and right. You can kind of go down and research Holland Lecky maybe. I was connected obviously to the Averils, and seemed to be a thing if you had someone really powerful in the church, they could make a lot of things happen for you. Uh, this is something from Prony I picked out, so it's actually in the Hervey Bruce papers from building downhill and all that. So it's noted here that Holland Lecky gave 10 guineas for some undertaking in 1786, and you have his signature there. And obviously, he had a lot of money to give for such a cause. I tried searching the registry of deeds to see if there was anything relevant came up, but nothing really relevant came up here. Um, I've highlighted a bit here. It talks about uh, the three houses in English Street in the city of Armagh. Once part of the house wherein John Singleton lives in the said city. Um, so I couldn't figure out exactly if this was relevant to the seven houses. I'm not entirely convinced it was. So it's one of those things that maybe if further research into this, you can figure out who John Singleton was, and kind of his background as well. Later years, it was occupied by Thomas Lewis Wilkinson, who was kind of a local doctor going around, I suppose, Benburb, Brantry, the Moy. This is an address to him, I suppose, from the British Newspaper Archive, and I just simply typed in his name, and it came up. This document from 1862, saying how important and kind of highly valued he was, I suppose, at the time. The valuation revision books are the best source to track owners uh, and what they were doing, and things like that. So we have here in 1862, after Mr. Wilkinson, we had Thomas A. Prentice buy out the entire, I suppose, lot itself. Here is an important character. Thomas Augustus Prentice was the son of George Prentice of Tandragee, later Bridgetown, Barbados, and Eliza Jane Kidd, who's the daughter of the rector of Jonesborough. Uh, so a very important individual. Obviously, I'll come to the Barbados connection now. But Thomas Prentice became the sub-sheriff for County Armagh, and was a distributor of stamps for that county for 43 years. So again, a man of important, uh, standing, and also of much money as well. But the George Prentice mentioned there is actually mentioned on another more, I suppose, sinister, maybe kind of database. This is the slave registers of former colonial dependencies, 1812 to 1834. And we have here the owner's name, George Prentice, in Barbados, and some of the, I suppose, slaves that he had ownership of. So it's just one of those things, you can go down a lot of, I suppose, rabbit holes with these things, and you can find all sorts of information that you just never would have thought. This has just came up on a wider search with searching for Thomas Prentice. Um, This is a snapshot of the 1901 census records. So we have Thomas Prentice and his household. So we have Prentice, his daughter, Susan Prentice's daughter, Esther, Margaret Brown, and Mary MacDonald were two servants within that house. But Thomas is given his age is 86 at the time, and he was date of birth. His place of birth was in Newry, which also had connections with, I suppose, the transatlantic, I suppose the sugar industry as well, and Sugar Island. You can think about that. This is a snapshot of the valuation provision books. So we have Mr. Wilkinson's name scored out as 1862. Thomas Prentice's name put in and owned it there in fee because he did actually own it outright before that anyway. House was valued at £40 at that stage. Another way in which you can use the census records to their fullest, I suppose, is the house returns. So within the, I suppose, telling who they are, who owned it, I also tell you how many rooms were in that building. So this had 6, so there's 10 or more rooms in this building. There's associated key up here. It's just very difficult to read. Windows to the front. We go down to Thomas Prentice. We had 10 windows to the front. So it's kind of big building, very important building. And the first, what type of a building it is a first class house. So it's a very important local structure. Further information from the newspaper records. Will of Thomas A. Prentice. He died, in 1902 or 1903, I think. So a lot of he had valued his kind of estate at £13,000, which was serious money, I suppose, back then. This is available on the Wills calendar on the Public Records Office, Northern Ireland. So it talks about the dwelling house in English Street, Armagh, with the houses and appurtenances, which came to me by the late John Stanley Esquire. Again, mentions another individual. The 1911 census notes that Frances, who was a daughter of Thomas, was residing at 15 Cathedral Close, so they were living with the Farris family. So they were connected. One of the daughters of Thomas married into the Farris family, and at 15 Cathedral Close was this building here. The Britain from Above archive lets you zoom into that building. So this is 1926, and this is the 7 houses, one of the 7 houses at the time. That's kind of a more zoomed in example. So kind of a really very interesting range of buildings, and out the back you have those stables. So it's kind of like a courtyard in itself that they had there, which is similar to a lot of the buildings in the Mall actually as well. They had these big grand fronts, but also had the stables to the rear of them. The Cambridge aerial photographs, this is 1955. This is ironically just a few months before that building was badly damaged and was demolished. So after the apprentices that was sold to John C. Boyle, who rented it out to the Armagh Technical School, he was an interesting character himself, fought in World War One, previously a JP in Tyrone and Armagh, and then the building was leased to the Armagh Council at the time, and then the Ministry of Labour, until there was a fire in that building in December 1955. And this shows you this newspaper image from the left, shows you the kind of the burnt out ruin of the building, which was then tumbled down very shortly after that. And I think I suppose the curator at the museum at the time was a wee bit miffed as to why they did that, because I suppose technically it was still, I suppose the idea was just to make it safe, and took them till 2023 to rebuild it, and it was just fantastic to see this uh, reconstructed, and kind of completes the street there. So it's a real credit to the Townscape Heritage, scheme to get that off the ground, and the builder there as well to doing that. Barrack Street, this is an example of kind of a very more difficult, because some of these smaller buildings are just weren't that worthy of mentioning, and as a result don't have much of a history associated with it. So 6 Barrack Street, military barracks at the end of the Common in 1736, was demolished in 1780. But the Livingstone's map notes cabins in this area, and John Rock's map also notes that there are buildings here. These are likely thatched cottages or a terrace, something like that there. There's not hugely important buildings to be recorded at the time. The Ulster Architectural Heritage Buildings of Armagh publication in 1995 notes that they were 8 single bay 2-storey houses, similar in scale to many of those in Dobbin Street, of random rubble stone. All the originally first floor windows were tripartite. Original opening to ground floor number 6 remains, with modern frame and shop and door. So kind of a description of those buildings there. The valuation revision books largely range the buildings between valued at £4, 10 shillings to £20. I would probably say the latter in this example, but it can be very difficult to read these valuation revision books, and again, there is a lot of care needed. So, for example, on the valuation revision books, number 6 is occupied by Isabella Farr until 1906. And in 1906, they kind of changed the numbers of the valuation revision books. So number 6 becomes number 11. And subsequently, number 6 is occupied by Robert Irwin. Now, I'm not convinced that number 6 is actually the number 6 that we're referring to in, today. Isabella Farr was actually living on the other side of the road, which is, the building's no longer there, unfortunately. But it just shows you that you have to be quite careful when you read that building, the valuation revisions, but also the census records as well, because it notes that number 6 was still occupied by Isabella Farr, which was just wrong, and it's just one of those things that they didn't change about. Now, I will say that the Public Records Office have associated map and a key with an itemized description of who owned each building. So that's in Prony, and probably that would unlock the mystery as to who was actually living there at that time. Another way in which to, I suppose, decipher this. So this is 1911 census, and I'm just going to focus here on number 31. So building number 31, which is occupied by Robert Irwin. Note all these buildings have the same layout. So rooms, they have 3. Windows to the front, they have 2. Everything's the same. So this would say to me that this is a terrace. This is a uniform run of buildings. It's a terrace row, which the barracks, this number 6 is. So we're on the right track here. And just to kind of completely ignore Isabella Farr. So we have Isabella Farr here, number 6. And note how higgledy-piggledy all these windows to the front doors. So the neighbours have 4, one of them has 2. So this is a whole different terrace, a whole different row of buildings in itself. So maybe it was Robert Irwin after all who was living at number 6 in the early 1900s. But it's one of those things that will just take further research. This is number 6 from the County Museum collection, 1964. Again, you have that original ground floor window kind of in its place, and how that building has changed. With the tripartite windows to the first floor as well. This is looking down. It's from the Lawrence collection. Looking down Barrack Street, we have the Coach Arch, and looking further up. This is from the believe it's the Britain from above. And the building we're looking at here, this is roughly where this is where number 6 is, just there. You can see Barrack Street still had the other buildings opposite it, which are actually quite kind of poignantly recorded in the County Museum Photographic Archive, was when they have the images of when that was being demolished. And this fuller aerial imagery here. So that really concludes, I suppose, this kind of talk and breakdown of some of the sources. So, even when you're walking through Armagh, you can figure out what was how what people were living through, what changes to buildings have occurred. So to the rear of Barrack Street, you have Little Barrack Street, and you have this kind of very rare survivor. So I talked about the sewers earlier on. This is I suppose, a night soil, I suppose, collector. So your um, bits and pieces would have found out the back here, and this would have been collected in the morning by, I suppose, someone employed by the local, I suppose, council at the time. And this would have been distributed to, I suppose, on fields and all sorts of things. So it was, I suppose, to reduce effluent going onto the dirty river, I suppose. You also have, I suppose, changes to buildings. So we have the limestone in Armagh, quite famous, but you have also the mortar. Mortar is also can be a good way to date the building and date the changes. So we have this kind of ribbon or strap pointing, which is a very modern technique applied to it here. So you can think to yourself, well, there's obviously a change to that at some stage through the mortar. So if you own one of these historic buildings, you want to know a wee bit more about it and history and things like that. This is another way in which you can find that. You have the jostle stones dotted all around the city, hence to the past, the kind of merchant past, and just they are built there, I suppose, to stop the horses and carts clattering into the side of the buildings. You have the building material, the conglomerate, uh, limestone, sandstone. You have the local brickwork. You have this on Russell Street, the Flemish spawned brickwork. Um, so kind of you do kind of wonder, is this something to do with Mr. Hugh Woods earlier on, the brickmaker? Was he building a lot of these structures in Armagh at the time, or just one of those things you just don't know? You just have to do more research and go into the County Museum, the Robinson Library to figure out. But I hope this was an interesting talk, and I will also, it's kind of good to have here all these different sources laid out, and you just never know what you can find out yourself. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope this was of use.